think we'll get rid of the, I guess I'd say the bittersweet part first, the demise of our old school. I'm sure some of you were down there watching the procedure. When was that? In March, I believe. Last fall, members of the society leadership had an opportunity to walk through the school to see if there was anything that we might like to claim. And we do have some things up here, the school bell, PA box, a number of things. I know some of us were wondering, is it really necessary to take this school down? And I can assure you, after walking through and seeing the condition it was in, yeah, I think it probably was. Very bittersweet, but the decay was pretty rampant. Not to mention vandalism, asbestos, broken glass, water down on the first floor in the basement. So like it or not, it did come down. It was fascinating watching. As I say, very, very bittersweet. And it will return to the public square, which is what it had always been in Waterville prior to 1886, when the school was first built there. Well, now, how many of you attended Waterville Elementary? You came through the elementary, good. How many of us were there for our junior high years? And how many of you attended high school classes there? Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Well, we're going to begin with a little trivia quiz. What were our school colors?
Green and white.
Green and white. That's why I'm wearing mine tonight. What was our mascot? Beavers. The fierce beavers. Alma mater school songs. I think the high school people might remember some. We'll get them to sing it here a little bit later, I hope. I hope. Here are the words to one of them. Deanna, that should look familiar. I think White House commandeered that also somewhere along the line.
White House called it Waterville River Rats.
The river rats. Okay. Okay. The gauntlet's been tossed here. Much of what we know about early Waterville schools came from Maddie McQuillan Lyon, class of 1885, teacher at Waterville. And those of you with a good memory who've been here for a long time, this was Helen Spafford's mother, Helen Lyon Spafford. She wrote a delightful little book in 1899, which we do have some samples in our possession. And her complete book is included in here. The first school we talked about in the Waterville area was the old Red Ox Mill School. The mill dated back to the 18-teens, around 1820. It was at the foot of what became known as Hutchinson Hill. This is Dutch Road, where it dead ends into River Road. We know it was in this location here. An old ox mill. We don't know how close to the river it sat. It was a two-floor establishment. In 1825, they refitted the upstairs into the first school in the Waterville area. I think I see Keith Stewart here someplace. Keith, you're familiar with Hutchinson Hill. You grew up right around the corner. Yeah. There you are.
I remember a two-story building that was down there by the river. We just thought of it as a
cottage down there or something. That might have been the structure was down there at the, by the river at the foot of Dutch Road.
Great. Thank you. The first school in Waterville, located right here, that would be the northwest corner of Main Street, now River Road, and South Street. And that currently is the home of Richard and Jenny Dean, who are here tonight. Thanks for being here, folks. Now, if I have this right, correct me if I'm wrong, Dick. The school did burn down somewhere around 1852, but this house right here, known as the Reed Ulrich House, was built on the original foundation. And we were told that, well, this is in the words of Maddie herself. A real frame schoolhouse, painted red too. The dimensions of this building were 20 by 30 feet. Inside were placed plain desks and benches arranged along each side in tiers. 2 rows of desks and 3 rows of benches facing the center of the room. The smallest pupils occupied the benches in front. The teacher's desk was on a platform level with the upper tier of seats. In the center of the room was a box stove upon which rested a drum from which the heat amply roasted the brain, though scarcely warmed the feet of those present. That school did burn down. They did not go too far to find a new location. Right next door, right behind it, 1852, they built what eventually became known as the Union School. Around this time, Waterville School totally reorganized its curriculum. It became a graded school, finally. So we had lower grades, intermediate grades, and high school grades. And I understand that even chemistry was taught in the high school there at that time. This was a real school. This is what it looked like in that day. This is what it looks like today. Many of you will recognize this as the Miracle House. Herb Miracle, and now owned by his daughter Cindy, I believe. Oh, I love these women. Nellie Bird Van Fleet is on the left. Her sister-in-law, Anna Bradley Van Fleet, is on the right. In the mid-1960s, they attended, well, they were founding members of the society. They attended Founders Day and did a wonderful recreation here. Well, what also is located in your booklet, it's entitled The First Meeting of Alumni of Waterville High School, Remarks by Nellie Bird Van Fleet, 1898. She had been a graduate from the high school. She was very proud of the new school, which we'll see in a moment, but she was very sad to leave the old school. So she actually wrote a poem talking about what it was like, all the memories that she had from that old school. It's delightful. Well, in 1886, we are ready for a real school, or a better school, an improved school. The public square was selected at that site. The village of Waterville leased the central part of the square for $1 to the school system to build an adequate school. We hired Edward Oscar Fallis as architect. This was not just a run-of-the-mill architect. Some of his other work, I'm only going to show you a very small sample. Some of his other works still survive, including the Albion, Indiana courthouse, Lenawee County Courthouse in Adrian, Michigan, Paulding County Courthouse, Paulding, Ohio. The Kerr House out in Grand Rapids. Wood County Home and Infirmary in Bowling Green, now the Wood County Historical Society, and even the Valentine Theater in Toledo. This is a small sample. I probably have at least a half dozen of other courthouses. We hired the best, and he gave us the best. The new Waterville School opened in 1886. It cost $10,000 to build this. It originally consisted of only 3 large rooms. Another large room was added in 1896, and still another in 1906. This is a close-up of the northeast corner. This would be taken from near the river. If you look very carefully, you can see that the 1896 addition is here on the northern side of the building. The 1906 addition on the other side is not here yet. Probably of far more importance is the privy, or the outhouse, that serviced the entire school population. This is the northwest corner, and this actually shows that you can see that second addition was not added yet. It simply stops right here. 1906, students on the north front. Thomas B. Pinkerton, not one of those Pinkerton men, but a very noted and popular principal of the schools. Pictured here, whoops, I'm sorry, got ahead of myself. Here's Waterville School from across the river. Here's Professor Pinkerton. And here he is with teachers. The first graduation picture we have was 1899. I like this one for a few reasons. My maternal grandmother, Alberta Esworthy Barnes, is here. And next to her is her close friend, former neighbor, John Whitmer. John graduated in 1899, taught school for a few years, and then came back as superintendent in 1903. So the training to be a superintendent wasn't long at that time. I see his great niece is with us tonight. Where did Mary go? Here, Mary. Do you remember him at all?
I do.
Do you? Here's John with teachers. And incidentally, Whitmer High School in in Toledo was named his honor. He later became Lucas County Superintendent. Class of 1901. Second and third grade students, 1902. First and second graders, 1906. Here's the class of 1910. Some classes were larger than others. Some years there were no graduating seniors, so there was no class of certain years. I'm always disturbed by this picture. Normally you wear your best clothes on picture day, remember that? This poor, I'm guessing a farm boy right here, barefoot, overalls. That was the best he had. My father graduated in 1932, and I remember in the 60s saying, "Dad, why don't you have a pair of jeans? I've never seen you in blue jeans." And he said, "Well, you know, back during the Depression, I was a poor farm kid. Sometimes all we had to wear were our bibbed overalls." He said, I just never liked the way I feel in jeans. That was a personal decision on his part. Teachers or students, it's very hard to tell in this era. Having your school down in what was basically the floodplain at that time was a bit of a hazard. This is after the flood of 1904, caused by an ice jam. Here's the flood of 1913, caused by torrential week-long downpours taken from across the river. That old ceremonial cannon was in that schoolyard for many, many years. The city of Waterville has it in their possession, carefully guarding it. That will become part of the decor in the new public square to open. Ruth Bennett, schoolgirl, lived where Polly Young Miller most recently lived, and she's posing on that cannon in 1913 during the flood. She would become Ruth Stickney. Verna, is Jeannie Reisler with us tonight?
I haven't seen
Okay. Jeannie has become a friend of the society. Her mother, Isla Park, was a science teacher in 1917 to 1919. Here she is on vacation, probably right after she left teaching in Waterville. Big smile on her face at Niagara Falls. Jessie Hall was a very highly thought of superintendent. Raleigh Jones, a very popular principal. Here again is R.A. Jones, and I leave the question to you with staff or with students. Let's take a look here at transportation. Most students walked to school. They had to come across the footbridge if you lived over the hill to get across the canal. If you lived out in the country, you had the latest in transportation. This is actually my maternal grandfather, Joe Barnes, and he took care of the area out around Newash, Noward Roads, that area. Here he is checking his watch to make sure he's on time. Whoever captioned this school bus did not do so in the presence of my mother. She made it very clear this was a school wagon. Speaking of my mother, all set to attend first grade. Here she is on her dad's bus. She's the one with no smile on her face at all. Yes. Well, we motorized shortly thereafter. This bus is in front of the old, Carlos now, the old Smedlap Smithy. Interesting to see what they use for a door. It's like the back door from a house. It's being repurposed. 1922 was the year we had a very, very fine yearbook. Here's the front page. A student named Milton, better known as Mitt Balaw, do I have that right? We think. Was the illustrator, and I think he was very creative. He wrote the headings for each of the section pages. A number of us are retired teachers. We get the tongue-in-cheek humor of driving that information home, that knowledge. The seniors headed off to life. The juniors. My favorite, the sophomores. This would be a sophomoric prank. And the freshmen. These are the 1922 freshmen, and again, look at the age that they appear to be, especially the girls. Athletics. Mitt was the pitcher on the baseball team, and apparently their first practice was a little rainy, a little on the soggy side. Here it looks like home economics girls in 1922 are serving lunch to delighted elementary students there. By the 1920s, Waterville was experiencing overcrowding. In fact, Charlotte Hutchinson, a new teacher, former graduate, actually taught her first class of fourth graders in the Columbian House due to overcrowding. I love this picture. It doesn't matter the conditions, her students had fun. She's a great lady. Another sign of an overcrowded school would be the portables. There were actually 2 of them just to the south of the school. Once Waterville did decide to enlarge, the newly formed American Legion Post purchased those, attached them together, and put them on Mechanic Street where they still stand. We recycle in Waterville, which is good. Another problem with the old school, there was no gym, no auditorium. This is Woody's Hardware on 3rd Street. This is where the Waterville Hardware is now. Woody's had the hardware on the 1st floor, but look at the size of this building. This is the one that burned in the big fire of 1955. The 2nd floor was so large, the ceiling so high, that basketball games were played there. Plays were performed there, dances were held there. At one time there was a bowling lane there, there was miniature golf there, there was roller skating there. It was the actual sports arena, I guess, in Waterville. In 1915, I believe, this is high school graduation at Woody's Hall. A new addition was added in 1922, a cost of $75,000. Prices were going up. Not only did it include 8 or 9 new elementary classrooms, but also a new gym/auditorium. Now, this was not a huge gym or auditorium by our standards today. Those of you that were familiar with that school, you know how you have the circle at the foul lines, and then you have the circle at mid-court for the jump ball. Ours overlapped. So, John, you remember if you put too much arch on the ball, you hit the lights or the ceiling, but it was ours at least. The girls' basketball team in 1922, they could actually play at home. I included this picture largely because I love it. I love those stylish but modest uniforms, especially the caps they wore. Here tonight. Some of you might remember Helen Lytle, longtime Watervillian. Helen was on that team. Well, by 1925, a couple of things happened. Our girls lose the caps, but they were the winners of the Lucas County Championship. This included the entire county, including the entire city. If you don't believe me, we had the trophy right here. Not only did we win the championship, but 3 of these girls were actually named to the first team all-county team. They were pretty good. We could also have plays in the auditorium. Here's an operetta, The Belle of Barcelona, 1935. This is a nicely staged picture of the class of 24. A few things happened in 1924, mainly the arrival of Harry Dudrow as superintendent. Harry would remain there until about 1950 when he became a superintendent at Anthony Wayne, but until the high school actually opened in 1952, he remained the principal of Waterville for those years. Again, a personal favorite, this was my Uncle Burl Conrad, who died at the age of 19 from a ruptured appendix. He's seated next to Garnet Reddish. Garnet would marry my mother's brother, Lester, and the reason I'm pointing that out is that as soon as she married, she was expected to resign as a school teacher. That wasn't proper. Besides, a man probably needed that job. Here's a nice photo taken by the Toledo Times, 1927. Student body of about 350. How many of you were fortunate enough to take part in a senior trip to Washington, D.C. or an 8th grade trip? They do that, Bud?
New York.
Okay. Here's the class of 1927 at George Washington's Mount Vernon. Moving into the 1930s, again, need for a new addition. Question was, is it going to be cheaper to remodel the old original school, or would they be better off to tear it down? Well, they picked the same solution that most school districts do today. This would be removed and replaced by a more familiar to you South Addition for the junior high and high school. $80,000 for this one. Even though it was hard times, we had a baseball team in 1934. I'm going to quickly run through the staff of the 1930s. I don't know if anyone is here that would remember them. We'll go through quickly. This is Ms. Baylor, Mr. Fetterman, who would serve as principal, and Mr. Norris. Miss Phillips, Miss Magzig, Miss Lewis. Notice there are no Mrs. yet. Miss Kaufman, Miss Garrett, Miss Stoker, Mr. Suter, Mr. Dudrow, Mr. Watson. School paper in 1931 was called the Waterlog. It included all the hard-hitting news that school papers continue to today. Page 1, 2 attacks of appendicitis at school. Page 2 focused on the class elections. Page 3 included a notification for junior play tryouts. Page 4 reviewed the sophomore roast at Parker's Island. Today we largely think of that as missionary or Indianola down at Farnsworth Park. Swimming and baseball were to be played. The baseball team defeated Monclova 6-5. 1935, the High Water Yearbook. We hadn't had a yearbook in a long time. This was the first since that really nice one in 1922. This one will be a little more modest, but again, these were hard times. This was the Depression. Class of 1939. Classes are getting a little larger now. Mr. Dudrow is still there. Teachers included Mildred Obenauer, Elaine Tuffle. 30 years later, I'd be a rookie school teacher at Whittier in Toledo, and Elaine was on the staff. Einabelle Janken, Mathilda Dower, Thelma Schroeder, Avis Archbold, Louise Louise, Clara Mailer, Lillian Hankel, Clemma Lehman. Any names familiar yet? Okay. This one might be the librarian, Lois Waffle. Lois had graduated in 1931, and shortly thereafter began her career as librarian. Mr. Disher and Mr. Bresock were the custodians. Moving into the 1940s, in some of the class pictures, you're going to notice a lack of boys. Some boys of a certain age chose to go on into the military. They may have finished their education later. In fact, I believe I counted in 1942, the girls outnumbered the boys 13-6. So you'd be a popular boy. Junior Senior Prom, 1945. Herb, are you in this one? Somebody thought you were over here someplace.
Yeah.
Okay. The boys basketball team, 1945 and 46. Moving into the 1950s, change was in the wind. Waterville, White House, Monclova would consolidate, and I believe that was the first such consolidation in the state of Ohio. Construction would begin on a new Anthony Wayne High School. Therefore, the Beaver Tail of 1950 would be the last graduating class from Old Waterville High School. I won't name the faculty because many of them are going to be named coming up. Officers of the class of 1950, Ann Suter was president, Fran Heller vice president, Marilyn Shepler secretary, Jim Simpson treasurer. I was hoping Marilyn could be here tonight, unable to. I was going to ask her, when's the last time you were called Murgatroyd? That's what her nickname is here, Heavens to Murgatroyd, apparently. She mentioned that in study hall, students were seated alphabetically, and with Marilyn Shepler sitting right in front of Jim Simpson, that's how they got started dating, and they've been married ever since. In 1931-32, they had seniors and juniors seated alphabetically, so that's how my mother, Lucille Barnes, got to know my father, Carl Conrad. Here's the rest of the class of 1950. Are any of them with us tonight? The last boys basketball team. And Bud, I think you're in there, aren't you? Right here. Bud is with us tonight, but you were a junior that year, right? Mm-hmm. Our varsity cheerleaders, Janice Barnett, Lois Farnsworth, Sue Matheny, and Janet Fox. Janice, sends her regrets. I phoned her, gave her a special invitation, recovering from a bout of pneumonia, but doing much better. Wishes she could be with you tonight. Junior high boys basketball team, 1950. Now in 1951, kind of a strange situation here. The new high school wasn't open yet, but graduating seniors would be in the first class to graduate from Anthony Wayne. So for 1951, 1952, if you were in high school in Waterville, White House, or Monclova, you were technically in Anthony Wayne, but you took classes in your own school. But you played sports for Anthony Wayne. A little confusing. Officers of the class of 1951, Janice Barnett, treasurer, Secretary Janet Fox, President Ernestine Delventhal, and Frank Bud Walbolt is not pictured. Were you playing hooky that day, Bud?
I don't know.
You don't remember? I love the picture of the junior high band. Our own Becky Potter Jacobs, who sends her regrets from Florida, wishes she could be with us, was the majorette. And my old friend Leonard Longstreet, better known as Dewey, was the drum major. I hope to pass the microphone around at the conclusion. We'd love to hear some remembrances and some anecdotes. There always seemed to be a lot about Mr. Dudrow. He was a great guy. Carolyn Lehman Herringshaw remembered Mr. Dudrow as being a sweet man, but very strict. Marilyn Scheffler Simpson remembers he sparked students' interest in current events. We learned to read the paper from front to back, not the comics first. Deary Launders, very dear friend of mine, gave me permission to relate one of my favorite stories. The language might be a little coarse, I will apologize, but I will be quoting Mr. Dudrow. Derry was a 7th or 8th grader in Mrs. Hendy's music class, and suddenly he belched very loudly. He said he doesn't think he did it intentionally, but it came out. The class broke up, everybody's laughing, except Mrs. Hendy, not amused. She told Derry, "You head straight to the office, tell Mr. Dudrow you don't have any manners." Something we have on display down at the Robbins house, I want to build up to this gradually. It may be the stuff of some of your worst nightmares, but we do actually have the office door on display. I hope it brings back fond memories. Well, now we have the confrontation, sent to the office, Mr. Dudrow versus Derry. I called Derry this week. His wife is not feeling well right now. He couldn't be with us, but I wanted to check out some of the details. He said when you go down there and you sat in the office, Mr. Dudrow would just sit there. He wouldn't say anything. "Oh, Derry, there you are. Shall I go on with the story?" Derry said you just sat there. Mr. Dudrow, would never speak until the student did. And Derry apparently couldn't think of anything to say, so the silence was embarrassing. Finally, Mr. Dudrow said, "What did you do, boy? Why are you here?" Derry said, "Well, Mrs. Hendy says I don't have any manners." Mr. Dudrow sat there a while and finally looked up and said, "What did you do, boy? Fart?" Derry said, "No, sir, I belched." Kind of chuckled a little, and another silence, and then he said, "Well, I think what I'd better do is send you on an errand. I want you to go across the street to the Iron Kettle. I want you to get us both a couple of Coca-Colas and bags of what?
Peanuts.
Peanuts. Peanuts. Mr. Dudrow loved his peanuts. So, Derry, you got the contraband, you brought it back. You said you both sat there not talking about much of anything through the rest of the class and part of the next period. And I think he told you not to belch in Miss Hendy's class. 1952 Trailblazer. This would be the final year for high school students. Next year it will be first grade through 8th grade. Officers included Secretary Mary Dudrow, Mr. Dudrow's daughter, President Darlene Krause, Treasurer Coral Smith, and Doreen Fisher, Vice President. Junior high cheerleaders, Patty Dominguez, Beth Van Fleet, Drew Eldon Parton, and Linda Strayer. We had a junior high band again, no drum major. A toy band, we started them young in Waterville. Holly, did your mother do the toy band? And the safety patrol, how many of us served on safety patrols? Good. Good. Let's take a look at the faculty, 1950 through 60. Cal Seckel, a teacher and principal. If you recognize some of these people, speak up.
Yes.
No booing, but speak up, good. Richard Harris, principal. Bob Smith, principal. Teachers included Pauline Albaugh, and Polly is with us tonight. Thanks for being here, Polly. Going back to Mr. Harris again.
Yeah, because his daughter's in baseball
To Polly again. Cleo Allian Booker. Now in 1951, they featured candid photos of the staff, so I want to include those as well. Miss Laura Blessing, my second grade teacher, lovely, lovely woman, from Rising Sun, Ohio. Cleo Bullis, my fifth grade teacher. Betty Campbell. Jane Condleton. How many of us had Jane? JC. I had her in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 6th grade. Loved her. Leota Current. Liz Dean. This was my neighbor and mother of one of my best friends and my teacher for a couple years at Fallen Timbers. Patricia Edinger. Remember? Marilyn Fleming. Josephine Freeworth. Bernice Geiser. Here's Derry's close personal friend, Janet Hendy Gephardt. I had Mrs. Gephardt in junior high for English. Thelma Hammond, her husband was Dr. Hammond. Marie Hall. Jane McGee, what a sweetheart. Joe Monroe Shively. Joan Richards, anybody remember her? Holly? Holly's daughter, or Holly is Joan's daughter. Jim Shantz. 7th grade, 8th grade science, and also the boys' coach. Myrna Schnetzler. Rita Schoonmaker. Harold Smith. Larry Swantish. Mildred Van Fleet. Lois Waffle. Marilyn Scheffler Simpson asked that I share this story. I'd Marilyn went back to see Miss Waffle when she was prepared to be married. She was getting married to Jim. And she said, I want some books on what I need. I want a good cookbook. Lois said, yeah, we have that. I want a good housekeeping book. She said, yeah, I have that. And then she said, Marilyn said, is there anything else I should have? Lois said, wait just a minute. And she brought back a book on birth control. So this is going back to 1950 maybe, somewhere around there. Yeah, wow. Those of you not familiar with Lois, she is the namesake of the Waterville Lois Waffle branch of the library. Very close friend of the Aldrich family, as I recall, yeah. Is this Betty Weens or Wines? I don't, does anybody remember? Weens? Janice Wittes? Estelle Reedy. Miss Reedy probably did more to stimulate an interest in Waterville history than most people. She was wonderful. Ruby Wiles and Agnes Ray were cooks. A year later, Mrs. Mrs. Crowell, Edna Crowell, joined Ruby. Will Disher, longtime custodian, pictured here with Mrs. Santemeyer, and a year later, Mrs. Detmer. Bus drivers, Mr. Groff and Carl Conrad, I remember him. And in the next picture is my dad with Paul Whitmer. My dad was a mechanic for Ernie Groff at that time, where Peddler's Alley is. And that's where the buses were stored, so Ernie used to supply the bus drivers. Some of you are probably going to remember these two, Lloyd Davis and Reverend Conrad Baylor. This is the playground as I remember it in the mid-1950s. As the school was growing, they needed more room. So this became the playground for the younger kids. And then the older kids moved to what was called the new playground. That's where the parking lot is now. Here we are in the Jungle Gym. Halloween, 1953. Our first kindergarten class, 1954-55. Easter with Mrs. Budd, Michael Benner, Patty Shear, and Becky Strayer. Did any of you come through Waterville's kindergarten and end up with a Bachelor of Rhymes degree? This was just donated by Steve Swede. It was in 1957, I believe the Mothers Club hired a photographer to come around and take pictures in the classes, which I think was kind of neat. We don't have any from kindergarten through 4th grade. I don't know if those were taken, if any of you have seen any. This was Cleo Bullis's 5th grade. I appear to be hiding behind my friend Jerry Randolph back here. And I just noticed, yeah, I think this is Terry Heedner right here. Terry was our only Waterville classmate to die in Vietnam. So, these were happier times. Let's see, this is Mrs. Mary Didier's 6th grade class. This is the year I missed Jane Congleton. She had a split 5th and 6th. And Principal Richard Harris, I believe, was the science junior high teacher and also the boys' coach. Now, one thing I can tell you about the picture, I know this was taken before Christmas. You asked me, how do I know that? Because if it were taken after Christmas, this would be a student at that time, after John Lithgow. Famed film star, has appeared in nearly 50 movies with noteworthy performances as the shy banker Sam Burns in Terms of Endearment, the reactionary preacher in Footloose, and along with Robin Williams as the transsexual ex-football player Roberta Muldoon in The World According to Garp. He was nominated for Oscars in the latter two. Versatile TV star, has appeared in about 14 shows, including award-winning roles as space alien Dick Solomon in Third Rock from the Sun, more recently as Sir Winston Churchill in The Crown, and serial killer Arthur Mitchell in Dexter. He currently stars as Larry Henderson in Trial and Error, a comedy about a man accused of murdering his wife. Strange plot. Now, John attended Waterville School in 1958 from January through the end of the school year. He mentions that in his memoir, Brahma. His father moved around a lot. He was in theater, directing, acting. He had come to the Toledo area to direct plays down at the Toledo Zoo at the amphitheater. But that fell through, so he will be moving after the school year, or shortly after. From his autobiography entitled Drama, he states, "There was nothing to fear from my cheerful, milk-fed new classmates, many of them sturdy farm kids with names like Weimer, Marsnick, Schneider, and Hiltebittel." I'm not familiar with the names Schneider or Hiltebittel, but let's see, here is, oh, I had the wrong glasses on. Where's Raleigh Weimer at?
Third one back.
It's Raleigh right here, right? And let's see, Jimmy Marsnick, I think, is standing back here.
Neil Thornberry.
Neil Thornberry. He also refers to a halting conversation with a pleasant fellow named Denny Booker across our lunch trays in the school cafeteria. In an act of almost corny kindness, he asked me what Santa Claus had brought me for Christmas. Is this Denny right here? This your class, John, or are you?
No,
you're the 8th
I'm 1 year
grade.
older.
You'll be coming up in the next picture. Right. He also said he enjoyed playing baseball on the Waterville Indians in the summer of 1958. If any of you were on that team,
I could have been.
okay, if any of you have a picture of that team, we would love to have a copy. He loved it here in Waterville, but Dad moved on, so the family moved on. Here's Estelle Reedy's class, so John, you're in there somewhere.
Right in the back.
Right in the back.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. In the middle, right in the middle, right there.
Right there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. John
Mary,
Scholl.
Mary Leatherman right in front.
Gail
Gail
Wilhelm.
Wilhelm, Ellen Sellers, Ernie Wittis, Mary Hesman. I can name them all.
Brings back memories.
Mrs. Reedy is way in the back.
Well, I mentioned Mrs. Reedy and the way she had of turning us on to history. The Waterville story was the 1956 project. My sister Arlene is in that one. Hi, Arlene. Ohio Here and There, 1957. And we've got another new era coming in 1960. What was then known as Fallen Timbers Junior High and is now known as Anthony Wayne Junior High was built next to the high school. This would house grades 7, 8, and 9. So 1960 would be the last graduating, is that the right year? Yeah, junior high class. These were the last cheerleaders: Judy Pope, Kathy Moores, Barb Dotson, Ruth Horning, Pat Simpson, and Suzanne Moores. And the last junior high football team. In a bruising guard at about 4'8" and about 85 pounds, I quickly discovered that basketball, baseball, and cross country would be my sports. My friend Deanna Bradley is here. Deanna and her husband John were in that last 7th grade class at White House. We were rivals. Part of it may have been our parents, but there were bragging rights. We knew we were going to be classmates the next year, but bragging rights were important. Now, Deanna tells a story that I can't vouch for. I mentioned that White House had kind of commandeered the song "White House Will Shine Tonight," and she claims that in that year they would sing that, and at the very end, we Waterville boys would say, "They'll shine our shoes." I, of course, have no memory of that. Well, beginning in September of 1960, Waterville was now kindergarten through 6th grade. Let's look through those years. You all know Bob Strait. Thank you so much for bringing the picture. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Definitely. Thank you, Carol. This would probably be right around maybe his first year as principal. Anybody in that picture?
Yeah.
Yeah. Carol also gave me a picture of Miss Davidian. I did not know her. Primary 4 class, 1969 and 70. I love this newspaper clipping you gave me. I've entitled it "Bob Strait with Friend." The caption in this article tells of a 20-inch, 6-pound carp that washed on shore of the Maumee River behind the school. According to Bob, it required no effort to land. Mark Shoemaker, I believe, was a reading specialist, pictured here with Bob, and Doug Groff, longtime building engineer and blacksmith on 3rd Street. Now, Fallen Timbers Middle School would open in 1973 for 5th and 6th graders. Waterville now would serve kindergarten through 4th grade. And although I did not know him, I believe David Hilborn, recently departed, a longtime popular principal. What we really need at the archives are pictures from the 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and beyond. I know many of you of that age are saying, well, that wasn't that long ago. Kinda. I don't want to insult, but we're thinking about the future. We preserve the past, we have to preserve the present, because obviously that will be the past in the future. We're thinking about your kids, your grandkids. We're thinking about people coming to the archives 50 years from now, and we need to fill in that gap. So if you know anybody in that age group, please tell them we welcome them. We'd like to see them. 1997, Waterville Primary School opens, and this will cease the use of Waterville as a public school in the Anthony Wayne school system. I'd like to conclude by sharing some thoughts from Maddie McQuillan Lyons, History of Waterville School, 1899. She writes, "It is not to the teachers alone, it is not to the pupils alone, it is not to the parents alone that all the praises of the high standing of these schools should belong, but to each and all who have insisted and encouraged its upbuilding. He who avails himself of the privileges of education has acquired a fortune that cannot be taken from him by the sharper, nor will it take feet and run away while he sleeps. This school of today that has grown out of the one held in the old red ox mill in the pioneer days is, in measure, a mill itself. The schoolhouse is the mill, the teachers, the millers, the pupils, the patrons, the knowledge to be gained, the grain, the brain, the power, grinding, sifting, flour for better, pure, happier, nobler lives. Words perhaps as true today as when written in 1899. Now I would welcome any of you to share any memories that you'd like to. Anything that comes to mind.
Oh, okay, I'm Jenny Dean, Virginia Dean. I taught at Waterville School in the early 60s. Not as many years as I would like to, but I was there like in 1961, 62, and again in 63, 64, and I substituted a lot there. To me, the funniest thing was that every fall, as the weather got cooler and the heaters were turned on, there would be the episode of someone in the boys' bathroom spraying the heaters. The whole hallway stank of urine. And Doug Groff would gather up all these boys, and generally it was the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys. He'd line them up and he'd say, "All right, boys, who is it?" And they would all stand straight, and finally somebody would say, "Him, him, him." And the culprit was always found. But Doug has had this wonderful method of getting the truth out of those kids.
I'm John Schmuel, and I went to Waterville in the 50s. And I think the thing I remember the most is, and the people that went to Waterville probably remember this too, all the teachers said, "Don't go near the river." And so when the ice would go, through the river in the spring, we were probably within a foot of the river. And that's one of the things I remember.
Thank you, John. Anybody else? Derry, I also had Mrs. Cindy, my favorite. Barb and Barb shared Jones, and I was too shortest in our class. I know that's hard to believe now, because we've grown so. But I went home from school crying, because she threatened that she was going to nail our hands over the door frame and pull on our legs to make us taller. She was my favorite. She did not introduce herself, but that's my sister, Arlene Conrad Rossing. Speaking of that office door, my sister, I was probably in the first or second grade. She convinced me that if I ever got sent to the office, Mr. Harris, the principal, had a paddling machine in there. It was a chair where he had removed the seat and there was a paddle. Thank you, Arlene. John?
Since Derry Launder is here, they missed one bus driver. Pete Launder was my bus driver also, so.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Yeah, your dad drove bus a long time. You did too, right?
I did too.
Yeah.
I drove me after.
Okay. Any of the high school people have anything they'd like to share? Any memories?
Jim?
Oh, there's that.
I don't need this thing, really. It's surprising that we even have, or had, a Waterville school. Old Bill Disher, who was the custodian, asked me one Friday, I was down in shop class in the lower level. He said, "Thad, you can handle the furnace." He said, at 1 o'clock, you get down, you put a scoop of coal in each door. There was 4 doors on the 2 big furnaces. And he says, at 2 o'clock, you get down, you do the same thing. Okay, no big deal. I kind of moved back and forth in school, not really doing what I was supposed to do, but I kind of had the free run of the place. I was in shop class, and all of a sudden, Mr. Harris come down, and he says, "Thad, you got to come down here now." We went down to the furnace room, opened the door, and you could cut the steam. He says, "What do you do?" I said, "I don't know. Bill told me to throw a scoop of coal in each door at 1 o'clock and at 2 o'clock. About that time, old Bill come waddling down the hallway. He said, "Oh, no problems." He moved a few valves, opened a few doors. You could just see the steam go right on down. Nothing blew up.
Anybody else?
I can tell you something, but it's not fit to tell.
Herb will be out in the hallway afterwards, unless you want to reconsider.
Pardon?
Do you want the mic?
I mean, I saw a lot of things, Sherman. What was interesting, when I became the first mail carrier, and I delivered mail to the school, I'd come in and walk down the hallway. This was a certain room where a lot of memories came back.
Anybody else?
I want to add to Mr. So-and-so. I worked for Bill Disher on 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. By the 8th grade, he taught me how to run them boilers. He gave me the keys and leave for the day. And I'll tell you what, if you've ever been in the Waterville school at 2 o'clock in the morning, all that banging and hissing and that, and I used to take the key and I'd sneak along the wall and everything. But I got used to not being scared anymore. And a 15-watt light bulb in the coal room. But that man, you didn't have a cell phone or anything. If you had a problem, you take care of it. But he taught me everything about them boilers. Yeah. I just figured out of it, didn't you? Thad there.
Who else?
The one name I haven't heard
is Dick Albaugh. I think a lot of people do him.
We all remember him in high school. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't go to Waterville, but our kids all did. And this is a little bit about Doug Groff. He was custodian at the time. And our son got sick. Well, you had to know our kids when they got sick, especially our boys. But anyhow, Rock, the oldest one, got sick in the classroom. And he went up to the teacher's desk and tried to tell her he was sick. And she didn't do anything. Well, about then, he did. All over her desk and the floor and everything. So she said, get to the office, get to the office. Well, he went out in the hallway and all the way to the office, he did. And he got in the office and they asked him what was wrong and he said, I'm sick. They said, well, sit down, we'll call your mom. Well, he said, no, I'm sick now. Well, all over her desk in the office. So they called me to come and get him. Doug Groff met me at the top of the stairway. And he said, just take him home, just get him out of here. He said, I've never cleaned up so much in a half hour as I am today.
It runs in the family to go to the office.
I really don't need this, but you mentioned Dick Albaugh, Mrs. Albaugh, and I remember Dick taking the kids to play basketball and football between the schools. I mean, this is a dedicated person. I remember him taking us to Monclova to play basketball, and somebody mentioned the gym. Jim did. Monclova floor was the worst floor I have ever played on in my life. And I was dribbling down toward the basket and the floor was so warped that I was going that way and the ball went that way. And I never saw Dick Albaugh laugh so hard in all my life. But that's a tribute to Dick Albaugh. That's the way he was.
If I remember right, that Monclova school too, if you were to shoot the ball, you had to shoot at the basket because the ceiling was so low.
Right, that was the other thing, yeah.
And I like the way we glamorized the boiler room escapades we've all shared. I remember perhaps one time misbehaving in Mrs. Curran's class, and the luxury of that was to go down and work with Doug Groff and shovel coal into that. As a result of that. But it's what you did.
I would never have admitted this in 1960, but White House definitely had the best gym in the area. It was a real one.
I'm too close to the speakers. I'm Priscilla Duck Bursay, and my mom was a teacher in junior at the Waterville Primary and also at the junior high. And my dad was mayor of Waterville. But what I remember from Waterville Primary was, first of all, the smell of melted crayons as soon as you walked in. Do you remember that? You said they peed on the radiators. I think our grades were just throwing crayons in there. And then I do remember the office, but for a different reason. This is with Mrs. Sheldrick as the secretary. Mrs. Sheldrick, I didn't know you were here. I'm Priscilla. Priscilla. Hi. You were so sweet, and this is a story for you so you can remember. My little sister Maggie had really bad stomach problems. We didn't know until she was almost an adult what was really going on. But Maggie would be in pain almost every single day. And she would go to the office, and she'd be sick. And she wasn't sick like your son was sick. She was just in pain, and she couldn't finish the class. And we were good students. We tried to be good kids. and you would call me down to the office to come sit with my sister. And I would tell you, why'd you bring me? I'm gonna cry more than her. I can't watch her be sick. And so, as you know, little kindergartners and first graders, second graders, back-to-back grades, we would sit together in your office while Maggie would be sick, and I'd sit there and cry. And then you also gave us our little treasure boxes every time we lost a tooth. Which was a huge honor. You would save that tooth all weekend. You wouldn't touch it if you knew it was loose, because you wanted to get your, do you remember this, Mrs. Miller? You'd send us down to the office. We'd go down to the office if you lost a tooth in class, which was a really high honor, and you got your treasure box. So, I think that was it.
She's the one. She's the one. She remembers everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I graduated in '51, was the first Anthony Wayne. But when I went to school, for the 9th, 10th, 11th grade, we played six-man football, Waterville. Nobody else in Wood County. We had to go to play all the teams in Wood County. Lucas County, the rest of them played 11-man. Didn't stand-up kids. And then, many years later, we raised a grandson. And he got called, we got called one day to school because he was down at the end where the lockers were, you know, just for the higher up grades. Of course, he got in the locker and locked himself in the locker. Little kid can do that.
I do want to recognize Dorothy Schwartz-Wardell, who's here. Dorothy was in the last Waterville class, correct? 1952? Yeah. Anybody else?
Hello. I'm Mrs. Sheldrick. My name is Aaron Bursay. My mom and dad are Jim and Terry Bursay. My grandparents are Bernie and Mondale Oots over there. My generation was the younger one at Waterville Elementary. I actually had Mr. Hilborn, my principal. If anyone knows who I am, I'm a huge car guy, and Mr. Hilborn was as well. So we bonded with that, and I remember, I don't know, at some point during 4th grade, you would be bussed over to Fallen Timbers to check it out, just to, you know, see what the next step was. And Mr. Hilborn pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I just got a new Mazda Miata. Why don't you ditch the bus and I'll give you right back to school." That would be completely unheard of today, but back in whatever year that was, early 90s or late 80s something, it was awesome. That's how cool the guy Mr. Hilborn was. So, is this the point where I drop the mic on the floor?
Polly, any memories at all? Former student and teacher?
I have so many, I wouldn't know what to share, but I'll share two. One is I lived in the house right next door to the school. We sold it last summer. Now live in Lakeside in Tennessee, Lakeside, Ohio, and Knoxville, Tennessee. But I was known as the Annex, and if something was needed at school, perhaps I might have it at my house. So I was allowed to run home and get it. May I tell the other part, Jan? Okay, all right. I'll just say use your imagination. There was a morning that a teacher that I know pretty well knocked on my door and said, "The Annex, you know, I need something," and I had it. And so I really did. The home became known as the annex, and I really did have a lot of things that people wanted. Underwear, sweatpants, whatever might be needed. But I wanted to say something about Mr. Hilborn because he was my principal. He's the one who hired me. And he's the one who really I give total credit for my career. I give it to that man. But back in, I taught 3 years in second grade, and I left to have a family, and when I came back to first grade, scared to death. And he says, it's just magic. They come in not knowing anything, and they leave knowing everything. And it's just magic. And I did that for 5 years, and during one of those years, I was low man on the totem pole, and I had to be transferred to the Monclova school. I did not, I'll repeat, did not want to go. And we were right up to the deadline. School was going to start. I think we were 2 days before the children would come. One day I'd push my boxes to the end of the hallway, and he'd go, can you give me just till the morning? Okay, so I'd push him back to my room, and I was getting pretty worn out with this, knowing that I was going to a school I really didn't know that well. I didn't know where anything was. And I got this call, and he said, they voted last night to increase the number by 1, and you are staying at Waterville School. I was so excited, I could not stand it. He goes, don't come over, because you'll spend the night here getting your room ready. Don't come over. I did not. I got up early, and I went to my classroom. My classroom was ready to go. And on the chalkboard, it said something about a fairy or the elves. The elves have been here, something like that. I kind of lost it. But my memories are at Waterville School. My parents, a lot of my uncles, I went there, my children went there, and today I saw no school for the first time. That was hard. That was hard. But go Generals.